Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Yountville Town Council meeting for Tuesday. What is today? May 19th, 2020. We are welcoming all of you by Zoom again tonight, so thank you for joining us. Before I move on to roll call, I do want to read our statement about how we are holding this teleconference meeting. This regular meeting of the Town Council is being held pursuant to Government Code Section 54953B related to teleconferencing of meetings. In addition, this meeting is being held pursuant to the Governor's proclamation of a state emergency and executive orders for certain sections of the Brown Act relating to teleconferencing meetings has been waived. The town manager is present in his office. I am here in the council chambers, and Vice Mayor Dorman, council members Moeller, Dornbecker, and Durham, along with staff, are participating remotely by video, audio, in conformance with the governor's executive order. First, I'd like to confirm that all members of the town council are present in the video gallery, and I do see visual confirmation that all are present. I'd like to now ask each member of the town council to respond in the order called to the following questions. First, are you able to hear the proceedings? And also, do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting? I'll go ahead and do that for you, Michelle.
I can do it.
All right, Michelle, you go ahead.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes to both.
Councilmember Durham,
Yes to both.
Councilmember Moeller. I see yes to both. Vice Mayor Dorman,
Yes to both.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes to both. And Councilmember Roller, just so you know, you did not come off of mute that time, but we will, let's go ahead and just confirm audio. Can't hear you. You're still muted.
No.
Samantha,
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not on mute. I'm getting muted on the other end. So.
Okay, so if you could just confirm, you can
Yes
hear
to
the
both.
proceedings. All right, great, thank you. So that is confirmed. The record should reflect all council members have indicated they're able to hear and do have agenda items. So now, Michelle, if you would please call the roll.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Here.
Councilmember Durham.
Here.
Councilmember Moeller,
Here.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Here.
Mayor Dunbar.
Here. And before we move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, I would just like to remind folks, members of the public have been able to provide public comment via email to publiccomment@wyville.com, and separate e-comment features available on the town's website prior to this meeting. Regarding voting tonight, before we proceed with the agenda, just to let you all know, any vote taken during this teleconference meeting will be taken by a roll call vote led by the town clerk. In addition, public hearing and administrative regular items that have representatives that are not staff will provide presentations as they would during a typical council meeting held in council chambers, and will be called upon to join our meeting and speak during their designated agenda item. So with that, if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to turn my camera to face our flag if you need one. Pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Next, adoption of tonight's agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
So moved.
I heard a motion by Vice Mayor Dorman, I believe a second by Councilmember Moeller. Roll call, please, Michelle.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Aye.
Councilmember Moeller,
Yes.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes.
Councilmember Durham,
Aye.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Next up, proclamation. Unfortunately, Michelle is not here to receive this in person, but I will go
That's
ahead and read this proclamation recognizing Municipal Clerk Week, which is May 3rd through the 9th, 2020. So we're a little bit behind, but we appreciate you every day. So the fact that we do it today is appropriate. And the proclamation reads, Whereas the office of the municipal clerk, a time-honored and vital part of local government, exists throughout the world. It provides the professional link between the citizens, the local governing bodies, and agencies of government at other levels. Whereas municipal clerks have pledged to be ever mindful of their neutrality and impartiality, rendering equal service with a high level of integrity to all. Whereas municipal clerks stay abreast of the affairs of the office through participation in educational programs such as new law workshops and City Clerks Association annual meetings of their state, county, and international professional organizations. Whereas municipal clerks strive constantly to improve the administration of the affairs of the office consistent with applicable laws and through sound management practices to fulfill responsibilities to the community and others. Whereas the municipal clerk for the town of Yountville serves as the town's election official, Political Reform Act filing officer, oversees the town's records management program, distributes town council agendas in accordance with the Brown Act, maintains the legislative record of council proceedings, oversees board and commission appointments, provides support to the town council and town manager, and acts as the custodian of the town seal. Whereas the municipal clerk, during the current COVID-19 pandemic, has modified the on-site town council meetings to be held by remote video and teleconference in conformance with the governor's executive orders and the Napa County health official in adherence to social distancing requirements, ensuring the safety of our residents and staff. Whereas the municipal clerk and management fellow have reached out to the Yountville community via social media platforms and other means to encourage online public comment in support of the town's commitment to public participation in town government during the COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas Michelle Dame has served as the town of Yountville town clerk since July of 2006 and has worked in municipal government since 1997. Michelle is also a member of the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, the City Clerks Association of California, and the Municipal Management Association of Northern California. Now therefore be it resolved, I, John F. Dunbar, Mayor of the town of Yountville, and the entire town council recognize the week of May 3rd through 9th, 2020 as Municipal Clerks Week and extend appreciation to all municipal clerks, but especially to our favorite, Michelle, for the vital services they perform and their exemplary dedication to the community they represent. On behalf of all of us, the town council, staff, and our community, Michelle, thank you for all the work that you do for us.
Thank you. It's
Here,
a
here.
pleasure. Thank you for the recognition. Thank you.
Now we are going to move on to our next agenda item, which is public comment on items that are not on our agenda tonight. And we did receive one public comment that Michelle is going to read into the record from Eric Knight on an item that was on our May 5th council agenda. Michelle?
Thank you, Mayor. As you said, this public comment is from Eric Knight, and it is a request for reconsideration of resolution number 20-3987, approving a settlement agreement and parking lease with Restoration Hardware. Mayor and Town Council, I watched the May 5th council meeting last night and surveyed the site this morning. I request that Mayor Dunbar, Councilmember Moeller, or Councilmember Durham request reconsideration of the May 5th resolution approving a settlement agreement with RH. I have two concerns about the approved agreement. First, I agree with Vice Mayor Dorman that there needs to be an additional review of the impact of the proposed retaining wall and parking along Washington Street. The parking lease Exhibit A property description does not provide enough information. Their current map proposes over 275 feet of retaining wall. For most of that retaining wall, the park grade to street level is at least 5 tall. Note that height of the wire fence. I believe the retaining wall will have to be at least 12 feet tall to meet safety considerations, including preventing a car from driving into the park and a child falling over the wall. A wall of that height will negatively impact the public use and enjoyment of our beautiful park for possibly 50 years. Will the wall be the same height of the concrete wall behind the community center? I noted today there are a drainage, swale, and redwood trees along the fence line. I also noted that for a short section of the southern parking area, a 20-foot deep parking spot ends up near the center of the southbound Washington Street driving lane. If the structural and construction costs are prohibitive to design and build a retaining wall to meet earthquake, traffic safety, drainage, and electrical undergrounding requirements, then how does this settlement agreement affect parking along Jackson Street and public access to North Park and the rural cemetery? Second, I have a few questions for the town attorney. I understand that the Brown Act and opening meeting laws allow town council to give direction to staff in a closed session to negotiate leases, but can changes to a master development plan be approved without providing proper public notice and a public comment period? Does Exhibit B, application for master use permit amendment line number 2 in the settlement agreement, allow for future changes to RH's MDP seating allowance without public notice and comment? Also, if the annual lease payments were not paid, does that constitute a default of the agreement, or can the town only charge interest for non-payment? Please consider my request. On paper, this agreement has some benefits, but will impact the community for many decades. Please put the public interest first and provide more time for public review and consideration. For example, could the town build the improvements and then have greater control of the use and length of the lease? Respectfully submitted by Eric Knight, Yountville resident. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are not allowed to discuss public comment items, but Steve, are you able to address any of the specific details in very short order that explain? I think there were some assumptions being made about final design that have not been finalized. If there's something you could just explain very briefly with.
I think that, Mayor, you're absolutely correct. The final design has not been approved by the town. So the town will be looking at both the design implications and the aesthetics. And we're not necessarily anticipating a 12-foot stone block wall similar to the sound wall that the residents actually at the community center requested. The parking ad hoc committee, comprised of council members Moeller and Durham, earlier held meetings where we actually talked with the residents about the one-way parking proposal, and I believe that would be what Mr. Knight was referring to. And the council and the staff committed that the prioritization, it was to be the build out of the right-of-way, and if that was to occur, there would be no interest in pursuing the one-way path alignment. So that's one thing we can get off the table. That we received an earlier comment from Debbie Wellborn that we've also cleared up, that there is no direction to proceed with the one-way pattern. So again, no direction, no pursuit of one-way on Lincoln and Grant. Final design is yet to be submitted. We are anticipating, and again, based on feedback that the council ad hoc committee and staff heard, there will be, it will not be an open fence because the residents did not want to see the vehicles, even though that's the current condition, and the lights. So the design will have some variation, most likely be a wood fence. Again, we're not quite there. We're working to see what the submittal is. And then, as soon as we have renderings, and we also don't have a landscape plan yet, that will come in, and the foundational area where the grade raises, because as many of you know, at the very north end, there's very little elevation and the grade changes, and it will be designed around that. So right now I can attest that the public works staff is looking at the very preliminary design concept to see if it's appropriate, and we'll go from there. Okay, thank you. Also, I know that we have several other public comments, later agenda items. Michelle, are we, do you have a clock that you're able to follow with the 3 minutes for the public comment going forward?
I should be able to do it in my live manager. What I'll be doing is toggling between the Zoom screen and live manager. So you'll be able to see me, but I won't be able to see you.
Okay, so I know that we have one of those coming up that's fairly lengthy. I just want to make sure that we're complying with the 3-minute
Okay.
time limit. So thank you.
Are your monitors on in council chambers? Your television monitors?
Yes, the screens.
Yes,
yes.
let me know if you can see the clock when I start it from here, okay?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
So do we have any other public comment for non-agendized items?
No, we do not, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to our consent calendar. We have consent items 7A through D, and there has been a public comment sent in related to item 7C. 7C is the changes to the zoning and design ordinances, the second reading and the potential adoption of those ordinances. And so I will enter. Let's do this. Let's vote on items 7A, B, and D, and then we will read the comment related to item 7C. Or can we just read the comment and vote on all of them together, Michelle? Okay, we're going to do that. Let's go ahead and read the comment that was submitted by Pam Reeves as it relates to consent calendar item 7C.
Okay, Mayor, I'm going to toggle to start the timer, and then I will resume reading. Email from Pam Reeves. I want to go on record one last time to express my opposition to the type of giveaways in Ordinance 20-492 in relation to the possibility of 3-story buildings. The town is handing developers a perk that is not really wanted by town residents, but one that was pushed by the out-of-town consultants and town staff. It would seem that staff and some council members desire to appear business-friendly to the detriment of the residents. This change will provide a whole new set of rules meant to make bargaining with businesses easier. That might have been a good idea 20 years ago, but now most of the businesses in town are owned by out-of-area multinational companies or investment firms. They don't have any real investment in the community other than their physical properties. How is it a community benefit to impact the town in this way with 3-story buildings completely out of scale with all others except the very special few existing historic buildings? The proposed sites really are not appropriate as locations of community benefit zones or hangouts. These areas are either isolated from normal resident routes west of Highway 29 or already developed pretty strictly for visitors, west side of Washington between Mulberry and Humboldt Streets. I don't see really locally oriented businesses being successful in these venues, but these giveaways will be a boon to businesses who can think up the verbiage to fit under the terminology of, quote, community benefit. We have seen this play out in the futile requirement of a retail component for wine tasting establishments. Yes, there is a retail component, but most of these have turned out to be a forced or inappropriate choice or an afterthought rather than a genuine attempt at retail diversity for the community. We cannot put our trust in business to do the right thing. Their allegiance is to their stockholders and profit margin. It is the job of the government to protect the interests of the people, and I do not see this change to the general plan and attendant zoning ordinance as a good faith execution of that responsibility. This issue also shows an alarming narrowing of the feedback loop that is staff, consultant, and council, in parens, and board members chosen by the council, close paren, rather than the broad exchange within the community. The reliance of this council on an out-of-town consultant with no real feel for the community has resulted in solutions to problems we didn't ask for and avoidance of discussions we sorely needed to have. The whole general plan process was orchestrated to prevent any in-depth discussion in favor of providing fluff forums to announce narrow choices for changes under consideration. Though I know this will fall on deaf ears tonight, I feel that we too often give up and let the town government chug on over all objections. That seems to be the way the system is set up. And please do not distill my comments down to, quote, oh, she just doesn't want any change. That is a cheap dismissal of my concerns and indicates a lack of consideration and understanding of the true cost of the consistent disregard of resident resident input along with business over resident decisions of the last several council. Again, that comment was from Pam Reeves.
Thank you. So I let the comment run slightly beyond, well, several, bit longer than 3 minutes, but that's fine. We were going to allow her to
Yeah,
make
and I
her
didn't
own
start right
comments.
away either, so I think
Neither
we're,
did I.
yeah, okay,
So,
thank
It
you.
was about 3.5 minutes, but that's all right. And there were no other comments related to the consent calendar, correct?
No other comments.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar as presented, items 7A through D.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Councilmember Mueller, second by Vice Mayor Dorman. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Mueller,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Yes.
Councilmember Durham.
Yeah.
Councilmember Dornbecker,
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. Next, we are on to a presentation regarding an overview and local preparations for SB 1383, short-lived climate pollutant regulations. I know that we have presentation. Do we have our guests in the meeting? Any word, Michelle? Samantha's shaking her head no.
They are not here.
They are not here. Okay.
All right, well, then we will move on until they arrive, I hope. And I will reach out and see if someone is attending separately.
Okay, if you would do that, that would be appreciated. I'm just going to double check that there was no last minute notification of. Nope, I don't see anything from our guests. Okay, we will move ahead, and if they do join us, we will try to come back to that presentation of item 8A. No public hearings tonight. We'll move on to our first administrative item, item 10A, Chamber of Commerce Agreement.
Thank you, Mayor Council. As you may recall, a few meetings ago, the council received a presentation and an update on the renewal of the Town and Chamber of Commerce Strategic Business and Marketing Agreement. And the council approved that 3-year agreement. And they also provided encouragement and direction to the chamber that if there might be other potential projects, especially to help with the COVID-19 recovery, that the council would entertain that. And Whitney Diver McAvoy will be joining us, but we did come up with a project, and it's a collaborative effort of the 3 Up Valley cities, each putting 25,000 in and working in relationship and in concert with the direction of the Visit Napa Valley, but focusing. I know that Vice Mayor Dorman had sat in on one of the league webinars, and they were talking about when they see tourism returning, there was a lot of interest in people going to beach areas. Well, we're not a beach, but we are number 2, which was a rural, quiet destination away from the crowds. And so part of the strategy that we're looking at is, again, the 3 Up Valley cities would each be contributing 25,000, and a program would be coordinated with our chambers that would really focus on the social media, advertising, media buys in the drive-up market. I don't see Whitney having joined us yet, but so that's
Yes, I just received a note that she was not able to join the meeting. I think she may have had the same problem with the other meeting. I sent her
Mayor?
that, yes.
Yes, the other people did try to join. Amanda Griffiths has just joined, so we will bring her back in, and I will forward a different meeting invite to Whitney unless that's what you just did, Mayor.
I just did that, but we also, I think, need to send one to Christy Pistone, correct?
Yeah, I sent it to all 3
Okay.
while you were talking on the other item.
Okay, so I think we'd like to try to move forward on the chamber item that we're in the middle of right now. If Whitney has been able to join us, I don't see her at this point. And do we have all of our guests for the presentation, or are they still trying to join also?
Let me check. I have one who has joined, Amanda, and I'm waiting for the other 2. And then I'm trying to resend to Whitney as well in case she's receiving the incorrect one.
It's a race to see who gets logged in first.
Oh, I hear somebody. Let's see. I don't know who this number is, so I'll have to check with them after I forward this email.
Okay, this
We're in
is the
limbo.
fun of Zoom meetings, folks.
Yeah, let me see.
So let me just ask council members after Steve's initial report on this item, are there any questions that you have on Steve's initial staff report? Any blue hands? A real hand, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. So I think you said the 25,000 would come from unassigned fund balance. So is that for this fiscal year?
Correct. It would be the unassigned fund balance as we finish the year end.
Okay, thank you.
Please, someone ask other questions. I'm going to go to my
I have Christy Pestoni, who I am admitting. Amanda Griffiths is here. And one phone number I don't recognize. 1619. Ending digits. Oh, it's Amanda is her phone number.
So we believe we have all three of our folks for the presentation on short-lived climate pollutants.
We do. Thank you, Sam. We just received Whitney as well.
Everybody's here. Okay, we are on the Chamber of Commerce item. We're going to stay on that item until we finish, and then we'll get back to our presentation that was item 8A. So welcome to all of you. And Whitney, welcome to you first. We just heard a staff report from town manager. I don't know that you heard that as you were trying to log in, but if you'd like to make any statement about the request for funding.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry about that, everyone.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much. So lovely to see all of you. Yes, so I heard a little bit about Steve's staff report, but when we last got together to review the chamber contract, there was desire from the council to support additional destination marketing activities. And in collaboration with St. Helena and Calistoga, we have looked into combining resources, $25,000 for each city/town to put towards a destination marketing campaign that would be collaborative between the three of us to enable our funds to go further. This would be in coordination and support of Visit Napa Valley's efforts. And we are working with them to ensure that the messaging and content is reflective of their overall strategy, as well as our individual strategy here in Yountville. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have regarding this collaboration or the potential plan. I know that reporting metrics is extremely important. And as part of this program, we would be able to report back to you monthly in terms of the total number of impressions on the campaign, the click-through rate to websites, and the type of interaction that customers have with the destination marketing ads. Thank you.
And one other bit of information I'll add is that the City of St. Helena Council voted unanimously 5-0 last week to join this effort.
Thank you, Steve. That was the question I was going to ask. Have we heard anything from Calistoga, the City Council yet?
I am not sure if it's on their agenda tonight. It may be in their June discussion when they wrap up their budget.
And Whitney, if you could just share a little bit of the timing of the rollout here. I know that there's a lot of fluidity with what's happening with state guidelines and county guidelines. What kind of a timeline, if you have one established, are we looking at?
Absolutely. So the goal would be for this to mirror the Visit Napa Valley campaign, as well as Visit California and ours locally here in Yountville, which right now that planned launch date is June 1st. So depending on approval tonight and with Calistoga, we would be able to move hopefully into securing our agency and getting all of the creative and copy done ready in time for a June 1st turnaround.
And have there already been discussions and agreement with the other chamber CEOs about the campaign content with messaging and strategy, or is that to be done in the future?
Yeah, we're working through that right now. We didn't want to get ahead of ourselves since St. Helena approved it on Tuesday of last week. We weren't sure where the other two towns or cities would land. We've had preliminary discussions kind of about what that would look like, but I think the most important thing is to ensure that it's aligning with the county-wide effort. And so we're in agreement there in terms of that it needs to layer under that. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And of course, we will ensure that the Yountville brand is represented properly and we're getting the type of recognition that we should be through the program.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Dorman has her hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Good to see you. So sort of, I'm along the same lines as the mayor. It's a $75,000 project. What percentage will be creative dollars? Will you spend on the creative, give or take?
Yeah, great question, Vice Mayor. Since we haven't finalized our choice of agency, I can't give you an exact number on that yet. We're exploring going with the Marrying Agency, who does both our creative and work for the destination of Yountville, as well as Visit Napa Valley. By going with that agency, there is significant cost savings in creative, and that's the direction that we're looking to go with. But we're also doing our due diligence by checking in with the other agency used by the other cities to give them an opportunity to bid on the project as well.
Thank you. And am I correct that, let's say June 1st turns out to be premature for whatever reason, are you guys flexible enough to plug this in when you need it? Because while I understand that we all understand the need to advertise us as a destination, we also understand that $25,000 is a lot of money given all current circumstances. So you guys, you're able to go as you need?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think the benefit of our modern world right now, in which we're seeing evidence of here tonight, is by working in the digital space, everything can be turned on or turned off very quickly. So for instance, when we went into the shelter in place, our destination of Yountville advertising was turned off that day that was announced. So it is literally like a flick of a switch, which allows us to be very nimble and to turn it on and off when appropriate.
And back to the creative, are you all open to considering an agency that none of the three cities uses, so that we get something really unique to our Up Valley destinations?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been one of the conversations that we've had, is, you know, wanting to make sure that the creative is unique enough and represents us with a fresh perspective, but also, you know, ties in with what Visit Napa Valley is doing, which is very critical. And that's a very fine line to walk. So we're trying to be very mindful to make sure that we're able to accomplish both.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you for bringing this forward.
Councilmember Dornbecker, question? Still can't hear you yet. There you are.
Yeah. Sorry. Hello, Whitney. Nice to see you. Thank you. I wanted to find out what Visit Napa Valley is doing around this issue as well for the Up Valley locations.
Absolutely. We've had, thank you. Nice to see you as well. We've had some very productive conversations with them, and they are supportive of this effort, ensuring that what we are doing does fall under the greater county-wide umbrella. You know, it's important that we're not saying, come to Up Valley, Napa Valley. That doesn't necessarily make sense to the overall consumer that thinks about wine country as all of Northern California. So we need to be really mindful about the language that we're using. And we've had really good conversations about that. So yes, it has been a supportive effort and collaborative with them as well.
So will there be some sort of creative that they will also distribute that will feature, you know, some of this message though?
Yeah, so it,
I mean,
yeah, that's kind of hard to understand. Right. I see what you mean. So it depends. So there's two avenues that we could go. We could do some sort of campaign that falls under their umbrella and utilizes their social media channels and their website. That's one avenue to go. We would control that message and control where those click-throughs go, but it would fall under what they already do. Or we could go a second route where we're really promoting kind of a different message that is not on their social media channels. So that would be like using our social media channels instead. So there's two paths, and right now we're trying to figure out which is, and Vice Mayor alluded to this, which is the most cost-effective route to maximize our dollars, and both have their pluses and minuses.
okay. Well, I'll check back with you after June 1st and see how it's going, okay?
Sounds great.
Okay.
The last question I'll ask, Whitney, is if you could just very briefly explain the target market as you see it now. My understanding is we, along with not only Visit Napa Valley, but Visit California, a lot of the statewide destination marketing efforts are recognizing that the drive markets and state targeting, as opposed to even national and certainly not international destination travel, is the likely audience that we're reaching out to. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. So this campaign, just like ours for the destination of Yountville, will focus on drive market. So specifically Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Bay Area, as well as the Sacramento Valleys. And you know, Mayor, you're absolutely correct. The international travel and out-of-state travel is going to be the last to come back. So we're very fortunate that we are surrounded by large populations within urban centers, and much of which are trying to get out and visit rural destinations, which I think benefits us greatly. So yes, drive market 100%. So 2 to 3 hour drive market. And then we're focusing on our core demographics. So that is 25 to 54-year-olds with a median household income of over $150,000. So that's the sweet spot for Napa Valley. Those are the same parameters that Visit Napa Valley uses as well. So that is kind of the overall demographic. And then of course you can also get more detailed and focus on those that like wine, like fine dining, have traveled to the destination before, have interacted with similar brands that align with our destination. So there's a lot of micro targeting you can do beyond those overall demographics.
Thank you very much. Council, have any other questions? Michelle, did we receive any public comment on this item?
No, we did not, Mayor.
Thank you. So I'll invite additional comment or action by the council. Is there anyone that would like to start on the dialogue? Councilmember Moeller?
I think this is exactly the type of plan. I know it's in the beginning stages, but how you've really framed it so far is exactly the thoughts I had when we, brought this up. Are there some special projects in addition to the contract that we just renewed with the chamber? I think this is the time, as I said before, this is where we need to spend our money. Everybody's going to be going after these same demographics that you described. So I think everything looks great. I'm glad we're doing this. It's always, generally everybody feels like this is the time to pull back, but it's really the time to move forward. So thank you for putting something together and coordinating with the other Up Valley cities. I think it's a great idea. Thanks.
And I think that we had a special guest in Senator's House that wholeheartedly agreed that this is a very compelling conversation.
Oh my
At the very
gosh.
least. Okay, now it's an official Zoom council meeting, finally. We haven't heard a barking dog, so we got a child. That's good. Thank you, Councilmember Mueller. Councilmember Durham, comment?
Yeah, I want to follow up on what Councilmember Mueller said as well. I like the fact that they are combining dollars with the Up Valley entities, municipalities as well, to get a bigger bang for the buck than just the 25,000. So I look forward to this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker, any additional comments?
No, but I would like to make can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to make consider adopting resolution number.
Sorry, Councilmember, just before you do that, we haven't heard from the Vice Mayor or
I take it back.
from me, so I'll get right back to you. Vice Mayor?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, the one thing I wanted to comment on, and then I'll go back to Councilmember Dornbecker, is one of the critical pieces for me to support this idea is the coordination with Visit Napa Valley and the countywide campaign as a whole. It doesn't mean that it has to be exactly the same campaign content, but it does need to be, in my opinion, in coordination and conjunction with the valley-wide effort, as was recognized by Whitney. The general public doesn't differentiate up valley, down valley, even sometimes Sonoma Valley versus Napa Valley. And so having a coordinated and focused message is going to be important to the success of this. So I appreciate you pointing that out also. Councilor Dornbecker, I will invite you to continue.
I would like to make a motion that we adopt resolution number 20-3989, authorizing the town manager to sign an amendment to the professional services agreement. I beg your pardon?
No, go ahead.
To sign an amendment to the professional services agreement between the town of Yountville and the Yountville Chamber of Commerce for the provision of marketing and promotional services and operation of Visitor Information Center from July the 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2023, to fund additional coordinated Up Valley COVID-19 reopening marketing campaign and to provide an additional $25,000 from the unassigned fund balance.
Thank you. We have that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Dornbecker, a second by Councilmember Mueller. Roll call vote, please, Michelle.
Thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker.
Aye.
Councilmember Mueller.
Yes.
Councilmember Durham. Vice Mayor Dorman.
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
that passes unanimously. Thank you, Whitney, and we look forward to hearing your periodic check-ins on how the campaign is going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hope to see you all in person very soon. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, Whitney.
We are going to go back now. We have our presenters for our previous item that have joined us. So thank you for that. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but we have you
Yes.
now.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we're going to go back to item 8A, presentation regarding an overview and local preparations for SB 1383, short-lived climate pollutants regulations. And do we have any lead-in before we invite our guests to make a presentation? Hearing none?
Well, I would just like to introduce, if I may, Amanda. She helps us on the Upper Valley Waste Management as a staff liaison, and also introduce Christy Pistone, who is I think her official title now is Secretary at UVDS and Clover Flats, I believe. So thank you very much for coming. This has been a topic that we spent quite a bit of time on at our Upper Valley Waste Management meetings, and this is information and you've heard me give brief introductions about this before, but this is a very big project that is coming from Cal Recycle, and it will change the way we all look at garbage in the very near future. So thank you for both coming and giving the council a presentation.
And welcome.
I think I'm mute. Am I muted? Oh, okay.
You're good.
We can hear you.
Okay, I think I'm off mute now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a brief overview on 1383, and then Christy Pistone will talk a little bit about kind of how they're preparing here locally. So SB 1383 is the most significant waste reduction mandate to be adopted in California in the last 30 years, and it requires California to reduce organic waste disposal in landfills by 75% by 2025. So in other words, California must reduce organic waste disposal by more than 20 million tons annually by 2025. And I'll read you the official definition for Cal Recycle for organic waste. And that's food, green material, landscape and pruning waste, organic textiles and carpets, lumber, non-hazardous wood, paper products, printing and writing paper, manure, biosolids, digestate, and sludges. And this law also requires California to increase edible food recovery by 20% by 2025. And it establishes a statewide target and not just a jurisdiction organic waste recycling target. This law will have significant financial, policy, and legal implications for local governments. And I'd like to mention the following before I get started with the details of 1383. So the responsibilities of the Upper Valley Waste Management Agency and its member jurisdictions are still being determined. However, individual jurisdictions will likely have to play a role of some sort. And per Cal Recycle, jurisdiction means a city, a county, or a city and county, or a special district that provides solid waste handling collection services. A city may utilize a joint powers authority to comply with the requirements of this chapter, except that the individual city shall remain ultimately responsible for compliance. So I'll use jurisdiction in my presentation just to make it a little easier, but that's kind of the definition to keep in mind. You can go to the next slide. Cal Recycle started the formal regulation rulemaking in January 2019, and the current comment period ends May 20th, 2020, which I think is tomorrow. And Cal Recycle does not anticipate any delays or changes to the current regs. Jurisdictions must have their programs in place on January 1st, 2022, and Cal Recycle can begin enforcement actions on jurisdictions and other entities also on January 1st, 2022. The enforcement process on jurisdictions is different than under AB 939. A regulated entity, such as a city or county, can be issued a violation and be subject to enforcement for failure to comply with any individual aspect of the regulation. And this is different from the unique AB 939 enforcement structure, where jurisdictions' overall efforts to achieve a specific target are reviewed. In 2024, jurisdictions will be required to take enforcement against non-compliant entities, which would be a business or organic waste generator that's not separating organic waste for composting. In 2025 as a whole, California must achieve a 75% reduction in organic waste disposal and 20% food recovery for human consumption targets. Next slide. Jurisdictions will be required to adequately resource these programs and have them here. They're broken into 6 categories. Jurisdiction must provide organic waste collection services to all residents and businesses. This means collection service for all organic waste. Containers must have prescribed colors, which is any shade of gray or black for trash, green for organic waste, and blue containers for traditional recyclables. Jurisdictions must establish a food recovery program for all Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generators. This means ensuring that there are edible food recovery organizations that have enough capacity. And I'll give you a few quick examples. A Tier 1 commercial edible food generator would be a supermarket or a grocery store with more than 10,000 square feet, or a wholesale food market. And Tier 2 would be a restaurant with more than 250 seats, or a hotel with more than 200 rooms and on-site food. The third is jurisdictions must conduct education and outreach to all generators. Fourth, jurisdictions must procure certain levels of recovered organic products. Fifth, jurisdictions must plan and secure access for organics recycling and edible food recovery capacity. Sixth, jurisdictions must monitor for compliance and conduct inspections and conduct enforcement. And lastly, regarding record keeping, all documents such as ordinances, inspections, education, procurement, enforcement, etc., must be stored in one location, easily accessed by CalRecycle. And upon request, jurisdictions must provide access to CalRecycle within 10 business days. Go to the next slide. This law extends beyond directing waste management and recycling operations staff. Each department or jurisdiction will need to understand how SB 1383 impacts their work. Record keeping and recording requirements extend to all of these departments, and jurisdiction leaders will play a vital role in ensuring compliance with SB 1383. And I won't break this one down into too much detail, but on this slide, you can see all the different departments that could potentially be involved with SB 1383 implementation. And go to the next slide. Each jurisdiction will have a minimum procurement target that is linked to its population. CalRecycle will notify jurisdictions of their target prior to January 1st, 2022, and CalRecycle will assign the targets to the individual UBA member jurisdictions. The jurisdiction can decide what mix of compost, mulch, biogas-derived electricity, or renewable gas they want to use to meet their target. SB 1383 also requires that jurisdictions procure recycled content paper when it is available at the same price or less than virgin material. And finally, procured paper must meet FTC recyclability guidelines, which means that products purchased must be recyclable. Let's go to the next slide. Jurisdictions will have to adopt an ordinance or other enforceable requirement that requires compliance with Cal Green and water efficient landscape ordinance requirements. This includes providing readily accessible areas for recycling containers in commercial and multifamily units, recycling organic waste commingled with C&D debris to meet the Cal Green 65% diversion requirement for C&D recycling in both residential and non-residential projects, and it requires new construction and landscaping projects to meet water efficient landscape requirements for compost and mulch application. Go to the next slide. In California today, there are about 180 compost facilities, with 34 of them accepting food waste. It will take a significant number of new facilities to recycle an additional 20 to 25 million tons of organic waste annually. So CalRecycle estimates 50 to 100 new or expanded facilities are needed. And I think I already mentioned this, but Christy will speak on the improvements they're making to their facility to meet SB 1383 requirements for organic waste collection and processing. I've got a couple more slides to go over. We can do the next slide. By January 1st, 2022, jurisdictions are required to have an enforcement mechanism or ordinance in place, yet they are not required to enforce until 2024. Between January 2022 and December 2023, jurisdictions need to identify businesses in violation and provide educational materials to those generators. After January 2024, jurisdictions shall take progressive enforcement action against organic waste generators that are not in compliance. The jurisdiction has the flexibility to develop its own enforcement process, and the regulations set a minimum penalty amount of at least $50 for the first offense within 1 year, and can go up to $500 a day for multiple offenses occurring within 1 year. Go to the next slide. This slide shows the various aspects of the law that require detailed record keeping. Jurisdictions will have to maintain all information in an implementation record. The implementation record needs to be stored in one central location, and it can be kept as a physical or electronic record, and it needs to be retained for 5 years. And there are penalties for failure to maintain or provide access to CalRecycle to the implementation record. And to the next slide, it's the last one. CalRecycle will evaluate a jurisdiction's compliance. Under the SB 1383 regulations, if CalRecycle determines a jurisdiction is violating one or more of the requirements, a jurisdiction will be noticed and will have 90 days to correct. Most violations should be able to be corrected in this time frame. For cases where the jurisdiction may need a little additional time, the time frame can be expanded to 180 days. And for violations that are due to barriers outside the jurisdiction's control, and which may take more time to correct, The regulations allow for the jurisdiction to be placed on a corrective action plan, allowing up to 24 months to comply. That's my portion of the presentation.
Okay, am I muted or unmuted?
No, you're good, Christy. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for letting me tag along on Amanda's presentation. It seems like I've come before you many times to say we're working on getting our air permits changed, and it's actually not all our fault. It's been very difficult with the the San Francisco Air District, and only recently was Napa awarded their permit after like a 5-year process. They were operating under a pilot program. So we've retained the same engineering firm, York Engineering, that Napa Recycling used, and you would be amazed the amount of money it costs to change your air permits. So it's probably going to be close to $100,000 to get these kinds of permits adjusted to allow food waste. We have the permit was done a few years ago with the planning department at the county, allowing us to receive food waste at our facilities, but the actual portion of the air permit has been much more challenging. And in any event, the goal is by the end of this year, we will have permits both at our composting facility on Whitehall Lane, and we'll be composting on the ground at Clover Flat. And the way the regulation is written, as Amanda mentioned, there's quite a lot of organics that is still going into the landfill, and will not be able to landfill those materials any longer. So we have to permit all the facilities to be able to process these organics on top of the earth instead of down in the ground. Also, the carts, you may start seeing the gray trash cart. We've discontinued using the brown cart, so moving forward, all new carts that we're purchasing are the gray colors. You have about 10 years to convert your color cart and container colors. They give you a 10-year time frame beginning in 2022. And so you're able to use whatever inventory you have in 2022, but post 2022, you got to go with their color palette. And the good news is we believe that for education purposes throughout the state, having that uniform color and also a more uniform education program with guidelines coming out of CalRecycle in multi-languages, I think it's going to be very helpful for the reduction of contamination in all of the carts. It remains to be seen who's actually going to be issuing the kind of penalty or the ticket in regards to contamination in the carts and the audits, and then also the tracking and the reporting. So there's still a lot that will evolve over time that we'll be working with the JPA agency and our local jurisdictions with. But that's where we're at right now.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Moeller, since you're the most intimately involved in this, did you have any additional comment? I know you've been keeping us updated at our council meetings, but anything further you wanted to add to our presentation?
I think that what people, there's a financial aspect to this. I think that with all these new regulations coming in that we all support, I'm sure, because it's going to really be a benefit to the environment, there will be a financial cost associated with this. So you will probably see changes in your Upper Valley Waste Management bill in the near future. So also with some of the changes that are coming in, Amanda addressed them, but one of the things I'd like to comment on, when we're really kind of mixing some of these the garbage material with some of the other waste, we're going to be generating a lot more of what we call is ground cover around town. So there will be a lot of this that the towns will be required to buy and purchase. So that will also be something that they'll really have a direct impact on our town. So and everybody else. But I think this is going to be a good thing for the environment, and it's going to be a bit complicated to get it all rolled out. So this might not be the last presentation you hear on this as we get a little closer.
Thank you. And that was a question I was going to ask is, given what's happened in the last 3 months and, just the general operations that have changed in terms of food consumption and disposal, have you seen any kind of trending, or might there need to be some adjustment in the rollout schedule based on kind of the new reality that we're confronting right now, or not?
Well, I'll turn it over to Christy in terms of what we're hearing from Cal Recycle.
Yes, thanks. Christy.
So right now, Cal Recycle is moving forward with 1383 implementation. However, the burden on the jurisdiction, and we've actually, the association that I belong to is aligning itself and really working with the League of Cities right now. And we think that there's eventually going to be some pushback. And if cities are really having hardships because their communities haven't bounced back, and it's going to take 2 years to recover from what we're experiencing now, there isn't any way you can force the jurisdiction to implement a program if it doesn't have the money. And so I think it's too soon to tell. That's what we're hearing. But what I would like to say is that we're working closely with the JPA ad hoc committee, with which Margie is on and spearheading, and Gary Bell as well. And the changes to our operating agreement, the franchise agreement, has a lot of new language in it that we're kind of working and negotiating through, but the language is really pretty standard in relation to managing 1383 within the communities in California. And so it's got a lot of requirements in it. So once that agreement is adopted and how much time we have to roll it out, the new programs, we'll definitely tell about how and when rates will change to comply with the new agreement and the requirements that'll be in it.
Great, thank you. I know we have a question from Councilmember Dornbecker.
Yes, forgive me because I'm not as knowledgeable about this subject except in my own home. So it seems to me in SB 1383, we're talking more about the food waste that is generated from commercial institutions. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually, it will affect everyone. So it's everyone. It's short-lived climate pollutants, and what creates methane. And so anything basically that is a methane creator that fits in this framework, it'll affect every business, every resident, and it basically is going to kind of a paradigm shift on how we look at waste. So I guess there will be accountability on everything, and they'll be doing we'll be doing lid flips randomly on routes throughout the year and documenting, contamination levels and,
Good.
So.
But I guess the aspect of it that was the recovery of food that can be distributed elsewhere. Will that be?
That is a requirement of it, and the hauler doesn't see that as a part of our requirement of 1383, but rather the jurisdiction. So you as the jurisdiction will have to put in place, or if you have businesses in your community that have food that can go to food rescue and feed people, then you'll have to work together with the other members of the community to create a pathway. And what I've seen right now with the feeding of so many folks through this COVID, it's almost like the process has started naturally. You know, the pathway has now been created. You're seeing everybody sort of starting to get food to people who don't have access to food. And I think Amanda's been involved with other committees in Sonoma County that are starting to lay the groundwork. I know we have food banks, and I don't know, Amanda, if you have more to add on this rescue component.
I don't. We're still trying to figure it out. What we want to do is make it a collaborative effort from like American Canyon through Calistoga. So we're kind of all working together. I don't have a formal plan, but like Christy said, just kind of trying to stay aware of what everybody's doing. And, you know, one way that we could help meet this regulation is by maybe even putting funding out there or helping buy refrigeration for organizations that already exist. That seems to be a big barrier for rescuing food. So we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do.
So there will be an education component that will help us understand what is expected of us going forward. Is that correct?
Yes. So part of what I'll do with like staff with the JPA, and we'll have more staff, I'm sure, that we'll have to hire, is educating whoever we identify that needs to recover food, educating them and educating everybody that's making organic waste that needs to compost it. So we'll be, you know, directly speaking, I would think, to all those different businesses.
Well, I think it's really great. Yes, Margie?
Just to add, I mean, we can certainly give anyone who's interested a copy of the slides that Amanda showed us tonight. I would consider this education number one, and there will be a lot. This is going to there's going to be a lot of changes about how we've viewed waste in the past. So I think they're all going to be very positive. So we will try our best just to make sure that we deliver the message any way we can through council members, special groups, as we move forward. So that was a great question. But if anybody would like any slides, just let me know, and I can reach out to Amanda and provide those to anybody. But we'll be giving you more information as it rolls out too.
Yeah, I would really like to have the slides. And I would like to suggest to my colleague, Vice Mayor Dorman, that we consider maybe incorporating something like this in one of our disaster preparedness workshops, because in a way, you know, it sort of dovetails the need for food. So anyway, I appreciate the presentation. Thank you very much. I still don't know enough about how we're going to do this, but I appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
One other platform might be the Countywide Climate Action Committee. We meet again on Friday. Okay. And so going forward, that might be another opportunity to present that information that way. Vice Mayor Dorman.
Thank you. And thank you, Christy and Amanda, for the presentation, and Councilmember Muller for your input. So as we look at this as a jurisdiction, how does the Veterans Home fit in? As far as enforcement or percentage or getting programs? I mean, I know it's too early, but just generally, how are we looking at the Veterans Home?
Well, the Veterans Home actually has its own separate contract. It's not really part of our the JPA, who is part of our JPA, is just a little bit of the county that's south of Yountville, the town of Yountville, and the rest of the county north, including the city of St. Helena and the city of Calistoga. Even though the Veterans Home is part of Yountville, they have their own separate contract. So those will have to be worked out with the state separately. But this is a new state mandate, so they will need to follow it as well.
So when we say jurisdiction, we do not mean town of Yountville. We mean the JPA participants.
Yes.
It means kind of anything of the above in my presentation. So some things we already know the JPA will do, like education, but for procurement, I'm fairly certain that the member jurisdictions will have to do some procurement on their own. The JPA wouldn't be able to do that. So it kind of means different things in my presentation. For the veterans home, the Calvert Cycle is responsible for overseeing any state entity that they comply with 1383.
Great, thank you.
And just to let you know, the Veterans Home is participating and has been for a couple years now in a food waste collection program. So we collect from like 3 different locations there, and I think they're going to be building a new hospital facility too. So we're already in the know of working with them on that too.
Great. I do not see any additional hands raised. Michelle, did we have any public comment on this item?
No, we do not, Mayor. I did see the town manager raising his hand earlier. Did he still want to say something?
No, my comment was simply going to be that the state jurisdiction over the state property, it's one of those challenging conversations we always have on jurisdictional oversight of the Veterans Home.
Thank you. Yes. Well, Amanda, Christy, thank you very much for the presentation, and we're looking forward to this rollout. I know that there's still some questions to be answered, but positive things moving forward. So thank you for coming and sharing. Councilmember Moeller, thank you for helping organize the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Christy, Amanda, thanks.
See you soon.
All right, we are going to move on to item 10B, which is the cannabis ordinance discussion. Steve, are you going to be starting this off, or Sandra? Steve, tell me something, one way or another.
Right. Basically, where we're at is the council has started the conversation at the prior council meeting. You identified a few areas that you still needed as a council to provide some input and direction so that staff can then fine tune that input and make the final proposed language for the ballot ordinance. So with that, one of the key elements was sort of a discussion on should we include the zoning overlay in the ordinance or not. So that was one of the things that's unresolved. And then of course, you've had a little bit of opportunity all to look at the edits that came out of the group conversation from the last meeting. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Town Attorney Gary Bell, who composed the edits and the consensus. And part of today's discussion is, are we truly at consensus, and what are the remaining issues, with the objective being that on June 2nd, we would bring back for you the actual ballot ordinance language, and also have thoughts on the 75-word title for the ballot language.
Yeah, so just before Gary gets started, I think if I could frame this, and Gary can confirm if I'm accurate or not, we have the cannabis ballot measure and the content of that. We have the cannabis business license tax ordinance, and a little bit of discussion about that, whether they can be merged or not. And that principally has to do with the title language, I think, that Steve just referenced. Also, we have the overlay zones. I think we need to revisit that conversation because we haven't gotten into the overlays in the last couple of conversations. So we want to touch back on that, and also how all 3 potentially will work together for the November ballot measure. So hopefully that context is accurate, Gary, and please go ahead.
Yeah, that's an excellent summary, I think, of where we're at. The changes in red line that are provided for tonight's agenda, that was based on feedback from the council from the last meeting, and then some clarifying and conforming changes throughout. So phrases and words being used consistently, so a few reorganizations, and then the changes that the council directed. Primarily the secondary use has been removed throughout, and other changes have been made. So the overlay zone, I think, is the question that hasn't been discussed and should be tonight, so that there's direction to staff on whether or not to include that. The other question from the council at the last meeting was whether or not these could be combined into a single ballot measure, given the limitations of the 75 words maximum of the ballot question. Short answer is yes. We do think these can be combined into a single one. If the overlay zone is also added, it will be tight. There will be It will be difficult, but I think we can fit it into 75 words. So we'll need to think carefully on and sparingly on that word use, but I think it is possible if the council wants this as a single ballot measure. And then substantial community benefit is the last piece as well. There was discussion on both sides of the issue whether or not to include it or expand it. And so the language is exactly as it was in the version that was there at the last meeting. If there's further direction on that, we can make a change or leave it as it is.
All right, I think we need to probably tackle the content of the ballot measure, the ordinance first, before we get into the combining of the different elements. I also do want to still talk about and reaffirm if the overlay zone mapping is still what the council wants to present as part of this item for public vote. And so we'll get to that, but I know that there may be some questions still lingering about the content that has been modified as Gary just described. So I see that Councilmember Dornbecker has her hand raised. We'll start there.
Actually, my question was about the ballot language. In that ballot language that refers to the taxation piece of it, is it necessary that we call out that we want the cannabis retail businesses to raise between X dollars and X dollars each year? I mean, do you have to, you cannot say just 3% or something?
Yeah, so state law requires that for a tax measure, it include the amount of annual revenue that it will generate. And so at this point, well, if you can assume that there'll only be one business because that's what the ordinance allows, and then given the size and location, a certain amount of that is assumptions based on other businesses. But yes, state law does require the amount of annual revenue it will raise.
Okay, and then I do feel that it would be important to show or talk about the overlay, because I think that that is an important piece of it for the voters to look at, but I will defer any other questions for now.
Thank you. I'd like us to focus on the ordinance and the content of the cannabis ordinance itself. Let's get through that piece first, and then we're going to get to the overlay component and then the tax component also, and then how we might want those combined or not. So I know that the Vice Mayor has some questions. Before I go to her, are there other questions or comments specific to content of the ordinance? I'm calling it the ordinance. It's basically the same thing as the ballot measure, I think. Maybe Gary won't agree with that because there's a technicality in there, but that's how I'm going to phrase it for now. I still only see the Vice Mayor's hand up, so we'll go Vice Mayor Dorman.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Bell, I just want to confirm with you that, and I'm at 9.30.030, compliance with state and local law, which under A talks about the retail business has to operate in conformity with all the requirements and regulations. I just want to confirm that that language does not create any vested right.
That's correct. Yes. So the way that the ordinance is drafted, it requires both a permit under Chapter 9.30 and then a use permit under Chapter 17.62, and both are required. And so this permit in particular under 9.30 does not create any vested rights. It's an annual permit that doesn't have to be renewed, and the program could be repealed in the future.
Thank you. And then I know we touched on this the last meeting, but I cannot find anywhere in the ordinance that says we're going to limit it to one. It says we may permit one, but it never says we're going to limit to one. But then a couple of the proposed ballot questions say, shall the measure establishing a permitting process by which the town council issues one commercial cannabis permit per application cycle? And is it not possible that since we also set the application process, we could set 2 or 3 and end up with 2 or 3 businesses? I don't quite see how that fits together.
So it's drafted this way because at the end of the application cycle, there will be one top-ranked application that may be offered a permit if the council doesn't find one of the 4 things to not select the highest ranked applicant under the ordinance. So it is possible that the council would go through an application cycle. You could open it up for 3 months, 4 months, some other period that you chose. There would be a highest ranked applicant, and then you wouldn't select that highest ranked applicant based on one of those 4 findings. And then there would be no business selected at the end of that. And so the council might want to open up another cycle in order to solicit applications again, and then have the opportunity to select the highest ranked applicant during that subsequent application cycle. So currently it's drafted so that you only select one. Theoretically, yes, under how it's drafted, the council could open up multiple cycles, but that's completely discretionary. This council does not have to open up an election cycle, and that's would be done by resolution and action of the town council.
So if I'm shorthanding what you're saying, we could end up, the way these are both written, the ordinance and the ballot question, we could end up with 2 cannabis retail businesses in Yonkers.
If the
as long as each one was the highest ranked during the application period.
Yes, if the council chose to do that.
Okay. And I don't know how much of this is really, well, let me just go on to 9.30.050.
Actually, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, if I can, before you move
Yes,
on, if I could ask a follow-up question to that so we don't lose it. Would it be the same situation if there was a prohibition of any more than one in this ordinance? The same would be true that a future council could modify the ordinance and add another in another cycle. But is that true?
That's correct. And in fact, the council could do that with or without voter approval. So yes, the council could always do that.
I know the direction that this council has been giving is that we are committing to no more than one. I think that was to the point of the Vice Mayor's question, that I think you were getting to the, how do we guarantee no more than one? And if there is a cycle that can be recurring, how do you not expand beyond one? We don't really have a way to prohibit future councils from acting differently than we act today. Is that correct, Gary?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I don't know if that clarifies, Vice Mayor, but I think that was what you were alluding to.
Thank you. And then, thank you. And moving on to 9.30.050B, like boys 7, and this is part of the permit application. It talks about that an application shall be automatically disqualified if it does not allow for on-site consumption. And I'm wondering again if that's really what we want to say, because there may be, because as I understand it from my conversation with you this morning, Mr. Bell, consumption is edibles and smoking. So taking that definition, if a spa came, or if a retail plus simply retail came, the application would be automatically disqualified. Is that correct as it is currently proposed?
Well, so there's a 2-step process. The application would be disqualified if it did not propose some on-site consumption at the location. Once the application proposes that, and if it meets all other requirements for the application process, then it would move on to the permitting, and assuming it's the top ranked one, it would move on to the permitting process. Once it reaches the use permit stage, the council could still choose to not allow on-site consumption through the use permit, and Chapter 17.62 makes that clear, that the council could choose not to allow it. But yes, the ordinance is drafted so that the applicant must propose some kind of on-site consumption. And that was based on previous feedback from the council that that was something they wanted. And so this is a way to ensure that every applicant, in order to be considered, would at least propose some on-site consumption, even if the council didn't later allow it.
So back to my hypothetical, on the first leg of it, the regulatory permit that Chapter 9 goes with, if an applicant came through and said, I don't want anyone to eat or smoke, that's not my business plan, that application would be automatically disqualified.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And I think the rest of my comments at this time, Mayor, are about the community benefit, which I assume we'll handle later. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I'm just trying to put a pin in 9.30.050B7 because I do know that we need to talk more about that. I remember talking about on-site consumption, but also recognizing that we are not designating the type of retail business at this stage. And if somebody wanted to do a spa or a retail space that had infused products that were not being consumed on site, we need to talk about whether there should be flexibility and have it be discretionary versus mandatory. I realize there's flexibility in the second permitting process, but you don't get to the second permitting process if you're kicked out of the first regulatory process. So I want to get back to that also. So are there other, yes, Councilmember Durham.
So all we're talking about here, Mr. Bell, is a type 10 license, correct? There is no other license to sell adult retail use cannabis in California. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if we're talking about a spa or any of these other ideas that the mayor and vice mayor have brought up, we're still only talking about a type 10 adult use retail license, correct?
Yeah, I think that's right, because there's no manufacturing or cultivation going on. The town doesn't allow that.
So as where ABC has 20 different licenses of how you can run alcohol out of your business, the state of California is only saying for retail adult use cannabis in the state is the type 10 license, and that's it, nothing else.
I think that's right, yes.
Okay, my point being is I think 9.30.030B7 does create confusion, but I don't think it disallows anybody else from coming in. But it seems like what you were saying is almost putting the cart before the horse. We have to allow it, but then we could disallow it later. Whereas if they're getting a type, I think the confusion is if they're getting a type 10 license, it's adult use. So if it's a spa, if it's, if it's vape pens, whatever, it's still a type 10 license. So, I mean, do we have, yes, I would prefer if the community votes to have a type 10 license in town. Given the size of the town, our parks, our hotel rooms, I do think on-site consumption is important, but I think by presenting this way, we are making it a little bit confusing for the applicants as well. So those are my questions and thoughts.
Yeah, so I would just add, I think based on previous feedback from the ad hoc committee and the council as a whole, that it was important that on-site consumption be a possibility at the location. And without the requirement in the application process, it's possible that the highest ranked applicant would not be proposing that, and that perhaps no applicant would be proposing that. And so this was a way to ensure that whatever application came before you would at least have the possibility for on-site consumption. And without this, it may not occur. and that it can also be that's a perfectly fine way to approach it. We were just interpreting the previous feedback from the council and trying to ensure that that was at least a possibility for whoever applied.
So does that then, based on what you're saying, then that could be part of the application process, this whole screening process, this whole point process, this whole evaluation process that comes along. We can have those questions in that application with the heavy suggestion, just like we've seen in other applications throughout the state, that you can get 1 to 10 points. You're going to get more points if you say you're going to have on-site consumption without having it be an end all that will not even allow you to participate. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so you could make it as part of the scoring criteria as a certain number of points. That wouldn't ensure that someone was top ranked that would allow or ask for on-site consumption. So this was the way that we thought under this framework that would ensure on-site consumption would be a possibility. Adding it as a scoring criteria as one of many may not achieve that goal.
All right, thank you.
And I'll just follow up. You've totally clarified the reason behind your language now. I saw it differently until you just described it the way you did, which is if you don't require it up front in part 1, then you aren't nearly as likely to get it in part 2. And I know I made a point, as did several others, that it be an option, not a requirement. So reading the language kind of in the silo of this section, it does look like every applicant must allow whatever that they're proposing in their business to be consumable. And you're saying there needs to be that threshold reached, and then we still work out whether it's infused, non-edible, or something else that falls outside the discretion of human consumption. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. I understand it differently now. I was going to say there was a light bulb that went off in my head, and then I realized the sunlight right behind me is going to be a bad pun. And so I almost avoided bringing it up, but I couldn't.
I have a question.
Oh, hold on just a second. We have the Vice Mayor's hand is up, and then we'll go to Councilmember Mueller.
Thank you. Mayor, could I ask you, my light bulb dimmed when yours went off. So are you saying that that by leaving in it must provide for on-site consumption, then we could say no? I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
Yes, as I understand what Gary is describing is the second phase, our permitting, the local town permit, still allows us to say, no, we're not going to allow the type of consumption that is being proposed in that business. We have that discretion. But if the business comes forward and says, in no way am I going to entertain the idea of consumption as an option, that I think we all have different ideas in our head about the types of businesses that might be attracted to come here. Some of them would more obviously involve consumable products than others. And so that it has been a priority for some of us. Steve, before we go forward, I just want to allow Vice Mayor if she has follow-up questions or comment.
No, I'll hold for discussion. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, and Steve, is it pertinent to this? I want to go to Councilmember.
It is, but this comes back to the fact under your conditional use permit that's a requirement. The reality is a different site location that is proposed may be conducive to a spa. It may be conducive to retail with a area for on-site consumption or smoking, but not all locations are. So that's also one of the rationales for having it be in the discretionary part of the conditional use permit, because the site that they propose to use is going to have a lot of influence on how the business may ultimately operate.
Okay, Councilmember Mueller.
Now that we're into the whole consumption discussion, I've noticed that we've only brought up oral inhalation. Does that mean it's ruling out topical?
Yeah, so I was going over this today with Vice Mayor Dorman. So state law does not define the word consumption. A lot of words are defined in state law. Consumption is used in the definition of edible, so we know that it's certainly that. If it does it extend beyond that, it might. I think that it under state law definitely includes ingesting the substance either through food or smoking. I think that you probably could further define consumption in your own ordinance if that was a concern, if you wanted to limit it to something specifically. As it is right now, consumption is going to have its normal meaning, which I would think means to ingest, consume, smoke.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
So did I just understand you, Gary, to say that we could add to, we can't eliminate what the state law is saying, we could add to it, which could be in our town definition of consumption, we could include topical, even if it's outside of the kind of fundamental definition from the state.
Yes.
For lack thereof.
Yes. As long as the definition doesn't conflict with state law, you can adopt your own. Yes.
Add in addition, so that would expand the types of products that could be made available by a business that may not, if it's a restaurant with ingested products, if it's again, we get back to you know, a day spa, personal care that uses products that are infused, that could be a topical infusion, which we would potentially allow to qualify as consumption if we have that definition written that way.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Mayor, I saw your hand come down. So have we covered this section? I think maybe at least for now we have that one section I called out. Are there questions from council about other sections in this particular ordinance? I think the way I read it, I saw the edits as at least I had been requesting. I believe that as had been requested by council for continuity and a lot of the definitions. So thank you for that. I'm just getting back to another screen here. I had one more note I wanted to just touch on. Actually, my question relates more to the ballot question, so I'll hold on that.
Okay.
Any other content questions for the proposed measure / ordinance? Yes, Councilmember Durham.
Just one question. 9.30.090I. Someone's scrolling very quickly. Very nice.
Loudly.
I'll just read the first part. The cannabis retail business shall pay all employees in lawful money. Do we in the town of Yountville utilize any ordinances or any use permits to dictate to the business owners HR requirements, human resources requirements for payroll?
I'll have to defer to Sandra and Steve if they're aware of any. I'm certainly not. This is a requirement in state and federal law. It's placed here in the municipal code because that way it's enforceable is a municipal code provision, whereas the town can't enforce state and federal law. And it would prevent, for example, paying an employee with Bitcoin or some in-kind services or products in exchange for services, and requires accurate payroll taxes and the like. It's certainly not required that it be in this ballot measure, and it could be removed.
Okay, thank you.
But again, what we're talking about here as a ballot measure is also what we're talking about as a proposed ordinance.
Correct.
Yeah, so just to make that clear, we wouldn't take it out as a ballot measure and want it in as an ordinance. It needs to be there or not. But you're saying even though state and federal law includes this kind of language, you're saying it's still discretionary?
Well, it's a requirement in state and federal law. So if the business didn't do this, they would be violating state and federal law, but the town couldn't enforce that. Only the state and federal law enforcement or the IRS could enforce that provision. So by including it in the municipal code like this, it allows the town to enforce that requirement.
So it's really just a safeguard. If that situation arose, we would have the enforceability.
Correct.
Okay.
But only on this one business, then. We have no enforceability on any other business because this line is not in any other ordinance or use permit in the town, correct?
That I'm aware of, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Are there any other sections or content that council would like to ask questions about? Seeing no others, I'll go ahead and ask Michelle about public comment now because I'm not sure what all the content is about public comment, if it's about this ordinance measure or any of the other elements that we haven't yet discussed. But I want to go ahead and ask for all those public comment remarks to be recognized now in case they do pertain to this.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. There are about 4 of them that basically use the same wording. So I'm going to read their names first, and then I'll go ahead and read the content. We received one from a Kenneth DePosky, Raymond Marceau, Marceau, Allison Stelzner, and Dwayne Gosselin. And they all are saying they would like to express their support for placing a cannabis retail business on the November ballot to allow the voters to decide if a cannabis retail business should be allowed in Yountville. And thank you for the consideration and support. In addition, we received one from Ryan Hill, and this, I believe council has seen this letter already, but I will read it, and it's very long.
So I'm sorry, just a second. I'm going to go ahead and start. I'll keep the 3 minutes. So go ahead.
I can start it, Mayor, if you'd like.
I couldn't see your 3 minutes. Were you able to monitor that while you were reading?
No, I could not see it.
I will go ahead and monitor the time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, this is from Ryan Hill. My name is Ryan Hill, and I was born and raised in Yountville. I have been operating my family's wine business, Hill Family Estate, on the corner of 6512 Washington Street since 2006, and I still remain very active in the community. Over the last year, I have been attending meetings and learning more about cannabis as the town of Yountville began researching and discussing a possible ordinance that would allow a business to open in town. Below, I have a story to share about my oldest son, Landon, followed by my support for cannabis and allowing a dispensary to open in Yountville. One of my closest friends, Elliot Taylor, has been a wealth of knowledge in educating me on cannabis, dating back to the last big earthquake that rocked our valley. Shortly after the earthquake, my wife and I were having a difficult time getting our oldest son to fall asleep at night. He developed a lot of fear and anxiety that stemmed from items in his room that toppled over him as the earthquake violently shook our home. We found ourselves having to lay with him in his bed until he fell asleep. Otherwise, he would continue getting up and begged us to stay with him. We signed him up for counseling to speak with a psychologist about his fears, but after several appointments and him not wanting to attend the sessions, we stopped going, and the cycle continued. One night over dinner with Elliot, I was lamenting about how hard evenings were at home with Landon, and Elliot asked if we had tried CBD oil. My wife and I both said no, and my wife expressed that she was hesitant to give Landon CBD oil, knowing it was derived from cannabis. For the next hour, Elliot spoke to us about the benefits of cannabis and then invited us to tour his dispensary called Harvest Inn, now in downtown Napa. At Harvest, we learned about a cannabis and soon felt comfortable experimenting with the CBD oil to see if it could help Landon sleep at night. After just a few days of giving Landon the oil, we couldn't believe the result, and it was like we had a new child that would say goodnight and fall asleep without any hassle. In light of this success, I decided to replace my over-the-counter sleeping aids with cannabis gummies that contain CBD and a very small amount of THC. While I don't take them regularly, they have helped me during restless nights, and my body and mind feel much better in the morning compared to the sleeping aids that I had used in the past. While I'm an advocate for cannabis, I haven't spoken much at the town meetings because I first wanted to hear from town residents and council members why they were for or against having a cannabis operation in Yountville. After hearing their arguments and concerns, I then wanted to see if my stance would change. Now that I have heard from the opposition, my stance remains the same, as the majority of concerns voiced by the opposition are related to personal beliefs, odor from the dispensary, and safety. Most residents that have opposed the cannabis seem to speak out of fear of the unknown. They are much older than me and have only known cannabis to be illegal for most of their lives. So the fact that cannabis is now legal is probably very hard for them to grasp. A majority of residents. All right, thank you. And the council has received this before, so.
Thank you.
And then finally, we received an email from Peter Jacobson, and I'm trying to get that opened here so I can read it. From Mr. Jacobson, he says, this email of support for putting the cannabis proposition onto the November ballot. Since it has become such a controversy, I think the town citizens should be able to decide whether or not to move forward. I do believe that they propose taxing of any cannabis operation should be included in the language of the proposition itself, so that everyone passes or fails, both will pass or fail with the same vote. I have one more to read that I have to minimize my screen for, from Whitney Diver McAvoy, representing the Chamber of Commerce. And I will do that now.
If I recall, that's not a lengthy email, so I don't need to time that. Is that correct?
Right, I just need to find it now.
I was trying to help fill in some time there for you, Michelle.
Sorry, Mayor. Slow to pick up on that sometimes. Let's see. Sorry. This one's taking a little longer. It's not coming to the email. Okay, here we go. From Whitney Diver McAvoy on behalf of the Chamber. The Yountville Chamber of Commerce supports placing a cannabis retail business ordinance on the November ballot to allow voters to decide if a cannabis retail business should be allowed in Yountville. The Yountville Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors will not be taking a position for or against a cannabis retail business in Yountville. We thank the town council and town staff for their leadership and thoughtful approach to this issue. Many discussions, workshops, office hours, etc. have taken place where cannabis has been discussed. Our community has had multiple opportunities to express support or opposition. We believe it is time to move forward with a decision regarding a cannabis retail business in Yountville. Thank you. Again, from Whitney Diver McAvoy.
And those are all the public comments received on this item?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I do, before we move on to the overlay conversation, I want to call the council's attention and Gary's attention to section 17.62.020, section entitled Requirements. I want to just praise the language here, Gary. I think it's, and I'm going to let everybody get there, 17.62.020 Requirements, section B. The reason I want to call it out is because this has to do with no person shall have entitlement or vested right to operate a cannabis retail business solely by virtue of issuance of a use permit under this chapter, and it goes on from there. I know that there have been many discussions about the longevity of a permit. If it were to be a vested right, would it travel with the business, stay with the land? And I think this language here is very clear and definitive, and certainly matches my intention of how the language should look. So I just wanted to call that out as being very helpful, I think, to clarifying that particular point. And seeing no other hands right now, let's move over to the issue of overlay mapping. This has been presented in the past, but we have not talked about it for the last couple of meetings. I just wanted us to go back over this. I'm not sure, Sandra, if this is something that you wanted to touch on, just as a refresher, where we stand on the color coding and the different sections, because we are going to be talking about whether the overlay should be a part of the ballot measure, as well as whether it needs to be in the ballot question. Sandra.
Hi, so I'm happy to share maps that we've shared with you in the past. And any of these districts can be added together, or some different districts could be excluded if that's the desire. But what we're showing you are 3 of the 4 commercial zoning districts and the public facilities zoning district. And starting at the north end of town, and well, I'll start with this photo. Okay, this is a great one to start with. So this shows all the districts that we're speaking of. At the far north end of town, you have Old Town Commercial, and it's located on both sides of Washington Street. On one side, it backs up to Highway 29, but on the other, it backs up to residential uses. And we see that condition with also the yellow district, the residential scaled commercial. It's found both at the Y and south of Mulberry Street. I've just noticed here that we're including the 2 parcels on Humboldt Street, but those are not included as an option. Just tonight, you had the second reading of the zoning ordinance that excluded cannabis uses from those parcels, and that came directly out of the general plan discussion. Shifting to the west side of Washington, you see the red zone. That's the primary commercial zoning district, with Washington on the east side and the highway on the west. And those are the three districts that are in what we call the heart of town. Excluded is the retained commercial district, and that's based on feedback that we've received in other discussions with the town council, because that district currently restricts the commercial uses to those that exist on the site, and those are lodging and restaurant. Shifting to the other side of the highway, we see in blue the public facilities zoning district, and it may present an option for the wine train parcel. That is the widest section that you see there at the southernmost part of this slide. This shows all of the districts for your consideration, but I can walk you through individual maps if you want to get a closer view of what we have there. And so those are up for your consideration tonight.
Thank you. Are there questions from the council? I need to get, can we lose the shared screen? Thank you. So I can see if we have any hands raised. Councilmember Durham.
I'm sorry, I'm missing the retained uses part, which you don't have to point it out on the map. Just give me a quick overview of what the retained uses are that aren't included.
There are 4 parcels in the retained use overlay. It's the French Laundry, the parcel south of that, okay, the inn on the corner, and then also Lavender.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you for the.
And just to clarify also, Sandra, you mentioned that recent action has removed a section. Are you talking about the small yellow rectangle at Jefferson and Humboldt?
Yes.
And so you're saying that, what about that? That is now removed from the overlay because the action excluded cannabis activity in a business there?
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
So if everybody's following along with that, just to make sure. It was kind of a standalone rectangle already across the street from the other part of the yellow section. Are there any questions? Yes, Vice Mayor Dorman.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Liston. So my question is pretty specific. It goes to 17.62.040 general conditions, item C. No cannabis retail business located on a property that directly abuts a residential zoning district, except that the cannabis retail business may be located on a property directly abutting the rear yard of a private residence. Could you kind of show me on the map how that would work, please?
I believe the example there, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, sorry, Sandra, to jump in on you, but there wasn't Ranch Market, the parcel that we used specifically about that, where it's a very large property with a building in the center, not adjacent to any, the building is not adjacent to a residential parcel, but the property abuts. Is that accurate? Either Sandra
Yes.
or Gary.
So I'll jump in. Yes, that is a good example. That one wouldn't be excluded under the definition that's in the ordinance. Two good examples are potentially in the residential scaled commercial on Humboldt, the furthest property east, which is the new Gates Estate office building, doesn't have the Gates use in it, but she was a developer. It directly abuts residential use to the east on a side property line, so it would be excluded there. And that's probably the best example on this map.
You're saying that would be a prohibited parcel, the newly constructed office space building on Humboldt, even though
Yes.
it's in this overlay, but it would be excluded.
Yes, because it shares a side property line with a residential district, which isn't permitted. It can only abut the rear property line, which it occurs in many of the other examples on this map.
And to follow up my example of the Ranch Market property, if Ranch Market were to redevelop that parcel, they could not move a building closer to the residential neighbor and then have a permitted cannabis use in that closer building, correct? Sandra or Gary?
You mean a new building behind
Yeah.
Ranch Market?
Yes, if they could not build and then operate a cannabis business in a building on that parcel that's now within a prohibited close distance from the
Well, I will
resident.
defer to Gary because there's a street that creates a buffer there to the next residential parcel. The way I was reading the language, that it actually physically abuts that parcel.
Yeah, I think that's right. The way it's written right now is that the property line, they basically have a shared property line.
But that the current structure is an acceptable distance away if that, and this is hypothetical, that please no one start claiming that Ranch Market's going to turn into a different use. I'm just using that as a footprint example. That property though, the rear parking lot now where they use, where they have van parking on the south part of that parcel does abut in the southeast corner against a residential parcel on the same side of the street. So they could not build a new building in that southeast corner that is immediately adjacent to the residential property to the southeast of it.
You're correct. It does. It abuts it on a side property line, so that would be excluded. I'd turn to Gary. Does that exclude the whole parcel or simply a building toward the rear?
I think that excludes the whole parcel.
Yeah.
Getting back to your question, Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So let's say that, so a business is allowed on a property directly abutting the rear yard of a private residence. And I believe I understood the town attorney to say that would allow a shared property line. As I read it, there is no, as it's currently written, there's no buffer zone for that shared property line. The retail cannabis business doesn't have to be 100 feet or 300 feet. Is that correct?
That's correct. It would need to meet all of the other setbacks that would otherwise apply in the district. But beyond that, no, there's no buffer zone. The 300-foot buffer zone doesn't apply to that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Durham.
Yeah, if I might, this is one of the reasons it's my understanding we want to discuss whether the overlay should be in the ordinance, should be in the ballot. It's something we can put into the ordinance if the ballot's passed, if the measure is passed. So this discussion we're having now about the overlays and about the location could possibly go on for another 2 or 3 hours. And so my point being is, should we be focusing on the question of whether the overlay should be in the ballot measure first, or if we think that there's so much discussion here that wait to see if it passes, and then we have this 3-hour discussion moving forward? Is that a correct assumption?
I would say not exactly, but I get your point, which is I wanted us to refresh ourselves because it's been several meetings and a few months since we've talked about the overlays. I think it's important that the overlay zones are included in the ballot measure, which is why I wanted us to review them. I'm not saying that we should redraw the zones. So to your point, I agree with you that we're not rebuilding these maps, but I wanted us to refresh and be able to consider thoughtfully whether they should be included in the ballot measure. I'm going to support that they are, but I didn't want to just pick up these pieces of paper without some refreshing of why they would be there, which is to assure the residents that there would only be certain designated areas of town where business would even be possible. Yes, Sandra?
As I'm looking at this map, I'm seeing that in the residential scaled commercial and the Old Town commercial districts, there's a handful of properties that would be excluded if these districts were included, because there's about 5, perhaps more, where a side property line abuts a residential parcel.
Okay, and I think to Councilmember Durham's point, these maps could be modified even if they're included in the ballot measure / ordinance following or could they? I should ask Gary, would we be locked into these exact maps if they're included in the ballot measure and voted affirmatively?
No.
Okay, so there's still some discretion about finalizing the zoning maps, just like there would be some potential finalizing of ordinance content?
Correct.
Okay. So other hands from council, any other questions on the zoning overlay maps? Seeing none, let's move on to the tax measure. And just, I think that's fairly straightforward, but Gary, if you could just present specifically what the tax measure component consists of.
Yeah, so it imposes an up to 3% gross receipts tax on cannabis retail businesses. It allows the town council to adjust that tax rate up to 3%. And so that would require, without voter approval. So the voters are imposing a maximum cap of 3%, and the town council can impose the tax up to that amount. It also allows the town council to tax at different rates for different activities. So it's drafted broadly because you don't necessarily know what's going to be proposed or who will apply for what or what will eventually be approved. And so the measure is drafted so the town council could impose the gross receipts tax on a specific part of the business or a certain type of cannabis retail business that went in. And beyond that, it's run a lot like the TOT. It goes directly to the town. It's administered by your finance director. There's returns that are set on a schedule, and it goes into the tax provisions of the municipal code.
And it is unrestricted.
Correct. It's a general tax, yes.
Okay. Are there any questions about the business license tax ordinance? Councilmember Dornbecker.
So I still have a question about how we could fill in the blanks as to how much tax we were trying to raise on the ordinance itself. It doesn't make sense to me.
It will be approximations. It's required, I think, as Gary was describing earlier, best approximation on a general type of business with a range of potential revenue generation so that the voter would understand, are we talking about $50 or $500 or $500,000? Is that accurate,
And
Gary?
that's the general tax that we would collect from the business. But it would be based on up to 3% that the customers would be charged, correct?
Yeah, so the 3% gross receipts tax is charged to the business, and it's based on their total gross receipts that they take in. How much revenue it raises, I think, will probably be a determination between the finance director or the town manager, or looking at other businesses in town, trying to make some comparisons about, you know, size, location. You might look at comparables in neighboring jurisdictions and try to think about, you know, is that a similar type of business, and would they similar type of revenue, and then come up with a dollar amount that makes sense and that is reasonable under the circumstances, and then include that.
We just went through a very similar exercise with the Measure S money and the 1% additional TOT. We did this also back in 2008 when we were putting together the Yountville Community Center, when we had two measures. One was related to the type of revenue that might be involved in the building of the community center. But I think the affordable housing measure that we just went through a year and a half ago, I think is a very comparable example.
Okay.
There
Well,
was
I still believe that it would be important to combine them into one, but that's my take on it.
That's a very good lead-in, Councilmember Dornbecker, to the conversation we're about to have, which is we have reviewed and looked in some detail at the three components, and now we are going to discuss how we would like to craft this ballot measure. Again, it's not in its final form. June 2nd, we will be looking at what we are discussing right now and going forward for the next few minutes, fewer than 2 to 3 hours. But I hope, but we want to decide, are we including the overlay zone mapping in, as well as the business license tax in with the main ordinance ballot measure. We have learned already that town attorney believes that the ballot question can be crafted to include at least the business license tax and the main ordinance. It will be very challenging to add the overlay language in that question. Is that still accurate, Gary? Am I phrasing that correctly?
Yeah, so what I'd say is the more that's combined into a single ballot measure, the less detail you can provide. And so if we're talking about on-site delivery and sale and a use permit and a retail permit, and you're trying to include all of that in a single one, if that's the council's intent, is to provide as much information as possible, that becomes more difficult the more that's in there. So it's doable. We'll just need to become more sparing with our words and provide less detail in some areas.
So another question for you, Gary. I entered this conversation thinking it was critical to include the overlay zone mapping in the ballot measure and therefore in the question. Based on the conversation we just had about the ability to modify the mapping after the fact, if the ballot measure is approved, do you feel like there are two of the three components that are the most critical? I'm assuming if two of the three, you would say the regulatory ballot, land use ballot measure and the tax ballot measure would be the two of those three. Is that accurate?
Yes. So the town council can adopt an overlay zone after this passes. The ordinance allows that, and the ordinance is drafted only allows a business in a cannabis overlay zone. And if it only allows it in a zone that doesn't exist, then none will be permitted until the council creates an overlay zone.
Understood. Yes. Councilmember Dornbecker, are you still waving at Sandra's child, or are you commenting?
Well, that was my favorite part of this meeting, seeing Hudson. But no, I'm wondering, how specific does the overlay language have to be? Can it be truncated to say, in order to accommodate it in the question for the ballot, can it be truncated to say that, you know, it is the intention of the town to only allow this business to be in places that are already retail oriented, that do not share, a boundary with a residential home or something like that, rather than do we have to spell out all of the places that we have identified that could be in the in that overlay.
So the ballot question does not have to specify all the areas that will be included. If the ballot measure includes an overlay zone, it does need to say that it creates an overlay zone and where these businesses will be allowed. And if it doesn't include that, it won't include that language. As far as intent goes, the ballot question has to reflect what's actually in the ordinance. And so it can't include what the intent of the current or future council might be.
If I could, I think it's also...
Steve, hold on just a second. Just say, I want to call the attention for the council to review the ballot question language that Gary provided earlier this morning that shows the maximum 75 words. And you get, I think, very quickly a sense of how quickly those 75 words are eaten up by the required legal language to describe certain features. So I'm very skeptical that we could get all three of these components into a 75-word title. Steve?
One, I just wanted to point out the way your draft ordinance is laid out, it makes reference to the overlay. But I also want to bring to you the pros and cons of including the overlay, because if you put something in there and you're telling the residents that this is where it's permitted, and then you go change it shortly afterwards, I think you're creating a real challenge for the council. I think you're cleaner to have the discussion, the community input, create the overlay, because what the language currently says is you will create an overlay. Because as the ad hoc committee knows, you've had conversations about should this block be in or not? And that kind of alludes to some of the vice mayor's comments about locations.
But we're talking, Steve, we're talking specifically about the question, not in the ordinance.
But I'm saying right now, if you put the overlay in, then you do, in my opinion, need to be relatively specific about which locations are going in, because that's what the voter is going to say. They're making their decision based upon the fact that either it was not permitted in this location or was. And that's my only caution. I don't know that you need to do that, because the language that you currently have structures it. The creation of the actual overlay would be one of the first actions the council would have to do along with the application process should this pass.
So are you saying that you're comfortable with the overlay mapping being held until after there's an approval, and if there's no approval, there's nothing to worry about?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add for those watching at home, the sample ballot questions are available from the town clerk. They are provided to the council before the meeting. If anyone wants a copy of those, they're available from the town.
And these are not final versions for us from which to choose. These are examples that the town attorney put together to show us how much subject can fit in the maximum 75 words using, as I think Gary has said before, some words and phrases count uniquely as one or more words. And it's not always commonsensical how that works, but Gary knows how to do it.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments about really what we're talking about is, are we trying, I'll just start again. I'll say, I think that we need the regulatory and the tax ballot measure combined together into one ballot question. I think it's important that the voter knows that if there is a retail business approved in town, that there will be a tax associated with that, and that money will go to the town specifically. It is not sent to Sacramento to be diffused into other jurisdictions. It would stay here for our direct discretionary use. So I think that those two components, the regulatory and the tax ballot, should be combined in this question. Like I said, I'm skeptical if we try to do too much, then we're not able to properly and clearly represent those two components. Councilmember Mueller? You're muted, Councilmember.
Now I'm unmuted. I totally agree with that. I think that I don't think we need to include the overlays. The way I'm looking at it, if the ballot measure does not pass, we don't really have to go through this exercise. If the ballot measure does pass, I think that's going to be an important conversation to have with the public. Really depending on a lot of different information. If the ballot measure does pass, we will get information with each district in Yountville, if it passed in that district and by how much, or if it failed in another area by how much. And I think all that information would be very valuable if the measure passes, for us to, at that time, craft the overlay zone. So I think it's a little premature for that part myself. Plus, to the mayor's point, I think by putting too much in there, we might be doing the ballot measure a disservice, either those who want to vote yes or those who want to vote no. So I think these two key points in terms of the tax and the current language, that's the way I would probably support it, and delaying the overlay zones until we get more information about how it passes and where it passes, particular to each zone or district, as we call them.
Okay.
Which we'll get that information in November.
Thank you. Councilmember Durham?
As we read these samples that the town lawyer gave us, it's interesting how they play out and how they read. If we indeed are going to try to keep it to one, there's no way we can have the ordinance, the overlay, and the taxation in one 75-word explanation. So if we're going to keep it to one, then the most important one should be the taxation and the regulation. The ordinance has a lot of details on use permit and conditions, which I think is important, and it gives everyone a very good overview of that as well. So with the taxation, with the ordinance, there's plenty of information. And once again, the overlay can be a 3-hour discussion with much more public involvement as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker?
I agree, and from the samples that we got, the one that is going to number 4, I think that one sums up with the regulatory, land use, and tax, no overlay. To me, that one makes sense.
Okay, and we're not picking final version, but that does give us an example, and Gary would craft, knowing what direction we're offering him tonight, he could potentially stop worrying about a third component and really fine tune 2 components.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'll just start by saying it's not a deal breaker for me by any means, but I do feel we should include the overlay, even if we have to do 2 ballot measures. As a voter, who I'm trying to put myself in shoes of a voter who is not as conversant with this as we all are, sometimes a picture is good to say, look, it could go, generally speaking, in this area. So as I say, it's not a deal breaker, but I am fine to go forward with it as everyone else has described, just putting the overlay out there.
Thank you. And what I'll say is I'll repeat, I started this conversation thinking that I could only support including all three components. I certainly understand the limitation and now support the idea of not including detailed overlay mapping information in the ballot question. So what I'm hearing is agreement on the regulatory land use content and the tax business license tax content, and we will instruct our town attorney to see what options he can put together for clarity with the I'll give you an asterisk on top of that, Gary, that if you get to 60 words and there is a way to get something like within limited zones in town or something to that effect, feel free to make an attempt at a drafting of that kind of language. I don't hold a lot of hope for that, but I do see you did have, well, you did max out both 75 words with the measure and tax ballot combined. But we'll give you another shot at consolidation of wording. Any last direction you wanted to give us, Gary, before, and I want to just be clear on exactly what action you're asking of us tonight.
Yeah, so this is just direction too, I believe. The on-site consumption issue that the council discussed earlier, I think the language is going to stay the same. Is that accurate from what the council decided?
Yes, and there was not 100% agreement on that, but I believe that there was majority agreement to leave it in as presented. Again, there is the ability to support and oppose this in November. So we're not going to be able to craft this so that there's 100% agreement one way or the other.
All right.
So yes, that is some content that we discussed, but we're leaving in.
All right, and then there will be a single ballot measure without an overlay zone unless the wording can be accomplished in some way to achieve that. The only other thing left from the last meeting was the substantial community benefit, and there seemed to be council members on both sides of that at the last meeting, so we left the language the way that it was. We can leave it the way that it is, or that can be part of the discussion tonight.
I'm going to go to Councilmember Durham, and I know that the Vice Mayor had said something about that, so I want to give her a chance to cover that. But Councilmember Durham?
That's what I wanted to talk about. So if the Vice Mayor would like to go first, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. So I've taken just a quick look through, and I see these are all from section 9.30.050, which is part of our permit application. They're in various sections A, C, and D, and they use the proposed ordinance has phrases, quote, community benefits plan, quote, community support, quote, vibrant business. And so we're kind of back to where we spend a lot of time talking about is what do we mean by these words? How do they all fit together? So I was just thinking that perhaps if we, I've talked to the town attorney, and we can do this all by, we can do the ranking, whereas, which is where a lot of this pushes to, we can do the ranking criteria by resolution. We do not have to list the ranking criteria in the ordinance. And that would give us a chance to really drill down on what substantial community benefits, pick a phrase, it doesn't have to be that one, but what do we want to call it, and what does it really mean, and how does that look in our ranking criteria? So that was my thought on it.
Councilmember Durham?
Sorry. So to speak to that, so here's my confusion, and Sandra and Gary can help me here. So under 9.30.050, 5. Okay, 5, double I, double, triple I, and 4. I don't know what you call it. I'm sorry. I'm not used to it when it gets down that deep. But you're calling it, in the double one, you're calling for a community relations plan. In the triple one, you're calling for a community benefits plan. In number 4, you're calling for a neighborhood responsibility plan. This all to me seems to be community benefit. So I forget, because I did not want to beat a dead horse, I forgot to write down where exactly community benefit is. 17.62.050, that's where it is. Once again, talks about community benefit. And you know, what's interesting is community benefit was brought up earlier during the consent calendar. And this is what, I mean, I called out the line about the payroll. I've called out these lines because what we're doing here is if the voters allow this will be the most restricted, overviewed, under a microscope business in Yountville and probably in all of Napa County and most of the Bay Area, as most of them are, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But to say, we've already said that it needs to provide all of these, it's as part of the application, it's already providing a community relations plan, a community benefits plan, and a neighborhood responsibility plan. That right there to me is a community benefit. What other business in town do we ask them to provide that as part of their application to do business in this community? None. And we've said we want them to be a part of the community and benefit from it, but we still at the council meeting sit there and go, what does that mean? To me, in this ordinance, we've helped define that already with this specific business. So I want to be clear that, to me, this is a way to move forward. If we're going to keep community benefit plan in the ordinances, in the use permits, this is the way to move forward with it. But do it with all the businesses. Don't just do it with this business, because then this is the way that we have that connection to the community. We know they want to be a part of the community because this is what they're going to do. Now, I personally don't want to hand them a list and say, this is what we would like to see in all those things, because I don't want to set the bar here when they're willing to come up to here to participate with the community, to be a part of the Veterans Home, the community center, with all these different events we have in town. So we have that community benefits plan line in here. That 5, double I, triple I, and 4 should be what the community benefit plan is then, and that's consolidated here. And I'd like to make a point that I think we should do this moving forward with all the businesses then coming into Yountville.
Thank you. Additional comments? Who has not had a chance to speak to this community benefit idea? Councilmember Mueller?
I think this is just a very, very interesting question, and I think as a 35,000 foot not a requirement, but it's something that's very desirable. I would think that because Yountville is so unique, our businesses are very unique. We're very integrated in this community, that this is generally something that we would want. More on the more granular level, I think we've really got a lot of things, as Councilmember Durham has pointed out, that seem pretty similar. It's really hard. I'd be really scratching my head if I'm a business unless they see these things all the time and they've got their little, we just do this and this and this to fill this in. So I think I would find it very difficult trying to really identify, if you told me to really say, how are these specifically different? I think we'd probably all come up with different answers. So I'm a little torn on this. I think if it was solely up to me, I'd probably pick one and delete the other two, or combine some words from some keywords from all three and put them into one sentence. It's kind of my thought. I do find it excessive overall, but the concept, big picture, I'm fine with.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker, do you have any additional thoughts on this item before I go to the Vice Mayor?
Well, I really found a great deal of logic in what Councilmember Durham said. I think community benefit is really sort of an ambiguous term, but the double I's and the rest of it, I think spelling it out like that is fine. And I agree with him that this is something that we should be saying to any business that wants to open in the town of Yountville, not just a cannabis business. But I think that the wording, the way it is, and the way he explained it, made sense to me, and I think that that's just fine. I don't think it's going to make a big difference, actually, if people look at it and say, "Oh yeah, community benefit." The community benefit is the income, the tax income, really, that they're going to derive. We're going to derive from the selling of this product. But for example, I don't see how them participating in our community events would go over very well in our town. Oh yeah, come on out to our bash and bring all your edibles. I don't think that's going to go. But I do think that at least stating it the way it is, I'm fine with it, and I don't think we need to really dig down into the weeds on it personally.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. No further comment?
Oops, correct. No further comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think very quickly, I'll try to be very quick about this, that I see this as two things. I support the language as presented. I think this speaks to the retail plus that was being talked about for several meetings for several months, about this being a unique business. And yes, it is something we have not specifically called out with other businesses, except the second part I want to address is I do see it as very similar to the secondary retail requirement that we have in our wine tasting rooms. That was new to any businesses when we first started that program. We had not required a secondary component to anybody's individual business practice. We saw that as a community benefit to provide retail diversity, where tasting rooms at the time were starting to have a little bit of a similar look to them and experience to them. And so in the same way as the language here, we left that to the discretion of the business owner. And the first feedback was, gee, I'm a winemaker. I don't know how to sell something else. And it turns out, yes, they do. We saw some great creativity, and we still have in our tasting rooms a wide range of secondary retail experiences. And it's now accepted, it's appreciated, and I'd say it's made all of our tasting rooms better experiences for all of us because of it. I think that this is the bonus experience, the bonus retail uniqueness that we were asking for all along. So I think it makes sense here, and I would look forward to all businesses, including whatever this type of business looks like. Again, it could be a day spa, it could be a restaurant, it could be somewhere you buy a variety of products that have cannabis associated with them. But that doesn't preclude that business owner from participating and being very much engaged in the community, regardless of the product. So anyway, I think the language is beneficial, and I support the language staying in. So if there's no further comment, Gary, Sandra, and Steve, do you feel like you've been given enough direction to put the final content and final presentation together for June 2nd. I'll start with Gary and go to Sandra and then go to Steve.
I think so. On the community benefit, I think the language is staying the way it is. Is that the consensus that I'm hearing from the council?
Fine with me.
I believe that is the case, yes. I'm not seeing anybody say no, 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 so the answer is yes.
All right, that I have everything I need. Thanks.
Thank you. Sandra?
As do I, yes.
Steve? You're good. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the lengthy, although not multiple hour conversation. I think it's important enough that we try to iron all of this out so that we know now what we are going to finalize and present to the public for consideration at our June 2nd meeting in time for any last minute changes and consideration from any comments that have stemmed from tonight's dialogue. So we look forward to having a final conversation about this June 2nd and then putting the ballot measure and the ballot question in place. So thank you in advance, Gary, for your continued work on the language. You've been very responsive to our direction so far. So thanks very much on that.
Thanks.
Is that all we need from this, Steve and Sandra? Yes. Okay. We're going to move on now to, do we have any staff information?
Michelle did have her hand raised, Mayor.
Oh, yes, Michelle.
I did. I just wanted to clarify for the record that we did not receive any additional public comment emails during this lengthy discussion. I've been checking my iPad and just want to make everyone aware.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Steve, any informational reports?
Briefly, I do want to share a couple things. One, I shared at the beginning of the meeting that just as the meeting was launching, Napa County received notification that the state has approved our expanded stage 2 variants. So the stage 2 variants form has been approved by the state of California. Businesses that meet the state of California stage 2 criteria can now open with appropriate modifications. Eligible businesses include childcare, office businesses when telework is not possible, residential cleaning and maintenance, outdoor museums, retail stores, dine-in restaurants, and schools. So there's additional modification. And the other thing that I will share on that, there's also face covering requirements. So Chamber will be working on providing that information. And also, as you know, the town has approved a supplemental business transition support program to the extent permitted by the state and the county, where we will look on a case-by-case basis to see if there's a way that we may be able to help mitigate for the loss of some interior seating or retail space by allowing, and this is subject now for dine-in restaurants, tasting rooms / bars. And again, each of those are all triggered by when the state says that they may, and also allowing for retail. The intent here is that for a period of 60 days, that the town is going to exercise some flexibility and waive some of our business and permit use conditions to support businesses getting reopened. And then we'll take a look at 60 days and go from there as to whether the program has merit to extend or not.
So just to clarify quickly, Steve, dine-in restaurants immediately permitted with the appropriate health and safety protocols?
Correct. And I also point out that there is signage requirements. For example, at their entryway, they need to have the county requirements for how they're certifying and how they're doing all of this. So I know some of them have already been working on that. So I think you'll see some of those businesses move very quickly. I will share with you that staff has been approached by approximately 5 businesses already that have expressed interest and appreciation for the business transition support program. So we know several of them are working on getting their details. I did learn late this afternoon that the ABC is being helpful and supportive, and they're coming up with guidance for restaurants at this point to allow for flexibility. The good news is they require basically the same kind of information, but instead of waiving the fees or not charging as we are, ABC does charge $100. So those restaurants especially, we're going to have to make sure they have their ABC certification. But the good news is there's a path there that will allow restaurants that can meet the site location criteria to use some of their outdoor patio and lawn space and move some seating out there that they're having to do to meet social distancing requirements.
And just also to be clear, because I know that it matters to our community, hotels for tourist activity are still not allowed to operate. And also, even though wine tasting rooms are mentioned in the county's attestation report, they have not been permitted yet at the state level, but it's in the report that once the state approves that, they can reopen, but they are not reopening on this order.
That is correct. And I'll also point out the child care programs, and there are industry sector guidelines that have to be met for each of these. So some entities that have been working on these and participating will be able to move quickly and reactivate. I also know that some businesses are looking at it. I've talked to some restaurateurs who are excited, others a bit more cautious because, depending on their specific space layout, it may or may not make economic sense for them to reopen depending on what that threshold is.
Right. Some of our businesses may need to wait until we get more visitor traffic back here in town. So Samantha, did I see you? Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I was reading during the meeting that there's national or local news stations reporting that our schools will be opening on June 1st, but NBUSD and the schools in Napa County are not reopening this year. They have pushed out information after that. So although the order allows for that, there is no plan for them to reopen this school year. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for that clarification. Is that it for informational report, Steve? Yes?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Move on to council meeting reports and comments. I think I'll start, Councilmember Durham.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I would like to make a request for an agenda item for the June 2nd meeting. Once again, as we did last year, for consideration of flying the rainbow flag for the month of June for Pride Month. Last year, with Resolution 19-3561, we created the ceremonial flagpole. And at the meeting on June 2nd, we moved forward with voting to raise the rainbow flag for the month of June in honor of Pride Month. So I'd like to do that again. And I'd like to comment, I'd like to especially do it this year based on the fact that all Pride events have been canceled. And so just as important as last year, even more so this year, to show our support for all of those out there. So thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw Steve writing down June 2nd agenda items. We'll be moving forward with that. Thank you. I'll just quickly say, in terms of meetings, no report on Napa County flood control. Very quickly, League of California Cities, and then I'll get to other council comments. There was a call on Monday with the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, where both as mayor and also as president of the League of California Cities, I continue to stress the urgent need for federal assistance with our revenue losses based on our business closures in all of Napa County, but certainly here in Yountville. A significant amount of our revenue has been shut off by these closures. It's not just about the public health response expenses, and the money that has come out of the federal government so far has been limited to large populations over 500,000, which only qualifies 6 of the 482 cities in California. So it doesn't do a whole lot of good. It does a lot of good for those 6 cities, but also the fact that it is only eligible for public health recovery expenses would not help us with our economic challenges. We've also been in close communication with the League and the state office, excuse me, of emergency services, and those conversations are helpful as we look at our expanding testing that's happening throughout the county. Very quickly, the Countywide Climate Action Committee is meeting again this Friday. That's one of our standing committees. Are there any other committee reports from any members of the council? Councilmember Moeller?
I have a general statement. LAFCO, Napa County LAFCO has just completed the initial draft of its countywide water and wastewater report. It's just been released today for a public comment 60-day period. It's only 560 pages, so anybody with a lot of extra time, you can read it or just flip to the Yountville section if you'd like. So that's been released, and we're looking for comments. Thanks.
That's on the pandemic top 10 stay-at-home reads.
It is. It is.
Any other meeting reports or comments from the council? The last then that I wanted to offer up is that I have been in conversations with the administration at the Yountville Veterans Home. We do have Memorial Day coming up in a week. They are not going to be able to hold the traditional public ceremonies. Unfortunately, we could all imagine why. The campus has been closed to the public for quite a while now. But I have been in discussions about participating on behalf of the town with very select few members of the administration to do a modified wreath laying ceremony that they're either going to videotape and or try to live stream. Not sure that we're going to be able to pull off the live streaming, but certainly there are plans underway to record the modified ceremony for Memorial Day. So wanted to get that out ahead of time, just so you know that we can. I'm sure there'll be questions about what's happening. I know most, if not, I think all other jurisdictions in Napa County have canceled their Memorial Day, activities. I wanted to recognize that there will still be a modified ceremony at the Vets Home, and that is basically following along with what the federal VA is doing in select areas of properties around the country. I will recognize that the administrator and members of her staff are going to be filling in for the Boy Scouts that are not able to come and place flags on all the grave sites. So the administration and staff members that are already cleared to be on campus are taking that charge and are going to keep that tradition of honor moving forward this year. So thank you in advance to all of them. That's all the report I have for tonight. Seeing no other business, no other hands raised, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to just 2 days from now, our next budget workshop, which is a special meeting at 9:30 on Thursday, May 21st. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
So motion, Councilmember Moeller, second, Vice Mayor Dorman. One final roll call vote, please, Michelle.
Thank you. Councilmember Moeller.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorman.
Yes.
Councilmember Dornbecker.
Yes.
Councilmember Durham.
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes. That is unanimous. And what I will say is we will adjourn and look forward to seeing you all socially distanced in our local restaurants very, very soon. Please, as much as you can, being careful with getting out and about, but let's support our local businesses and see you all on the streets of Yountville. Take care.
Bye. Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you again,
Thanks,
Samantha,
thanks.
also.
You're
for running
welcome.
our
Have a good
meeting.
night, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.